another podcast, another season. Would this be season 4?
Yes.
By the way, it would. All right, so
Yes.
we've been out of town for about 2 to 3 months.
Yeah.
Just got back just over a week ago, and most of us were working in different parts of the world. River went to Spain and the UK. You went to the UK just at the end, so that you don't like commit suicide after 2.5 months in Dubai in the summer. Most of us were out and about, and one topic that we decided to talk about for various reasons, but one topic that seemed to get a lot of airtime in the West and not so much over here is the whole topic of what's being coined as the Great Resignation. Now, a few people are talking about it, especially people in the recruitment space in Dubai. We're starting to see people talk about it, but anytime I open the laptop, read anything online, I would always see the topic of the Great Resignation come up. Now, before we just assume that everyone knows what we're talking about, I think we should explain what it is. There is a new kind of wave of, I would say, resignations happening, especially in the millennial and Gen Z kind of, I would say, segments all over the world. And for the first time in the history of humankind, we've seen huge waves of people resign for the sole purpose of trying to reconstruct a more valuable life. And, you know, I would say that resonates with me a lot. Has resonated with me my entire career. I've always resigned on the whim of knowing that there was something better for me out there. But to see that it is a movement, and when you look at some of the statistics within our generations, so millennials and Gen Zs, we're more on the millennial side. It seems that somewhere in the space of 30 to 40% of us have considered resigning in the last year to 2 years, in search of a more balanced, valuable, purposeful life.
Yep.
And I don't know how much of that kind of crosses over to the Middle East. I mean, I know a lot of people that are resigning, but not necessarily the hopes of jumping into a new role or new opportunity, but instead having time to reflect. I know a lot of people who are taking actions to get to the point where they can take that resignation or have already resigned. But yeah, in Canada and in the US, it seems to be a topic that is extremely hot and growing. I don't know if you felt the same thing when you went to the UK.
Yeah, in the UK, I think just when I was over there, I think one of the latest stats that came out was that there was for the largest ever amount of open jobs, which had just crossed over 1 million.
That's crazy.
And in particular when I was there, just when you're driving around, particularly in a lot of the service sector roles, the amount of adverts for jobs, always short-staffed. We can't take table bookings, or we can't service this.
The same problem.
Exactly the same issue. Now you speak to people over there, and there's a combination. You've kind of got this, view of, well, Brexit. This whole topic created some of that. So pre-pandemic, and then the acceleration of kind of that narrative of the Great Resignation, I think, has happened, with the pandemic itself. So, that is that kind of the causation of it. I don't think it is. I think it's kind of like that kind of period in time, which has just accelerated people to do it. And also there was probably if you think about kind of 2020, it was probably a point where, stuff was kind of hunkered down as such, that everyone just hunkered down into their roles. So there's, kind of as we get into 2021, outside of that pandemic, or we're kind of coming out the back end of it, there has now been like this influx of people saying, okay, I want more value in my life. I want my time to be better spent. I'm done with the 9 to 5 things. So that increase in resignations has definitely hit the market at a point as the market started to open back up and more roles come in. So I guess employers are feeling it more now.
But I wonder, there's a whole series of reasons why all this kind of snowballed, but one of the biggest kind of, I think, motivations is COVID as a new kind of reality that's here to stay, I would think for another year or two, has kind of accelerated a way of life, a lifestyle of a work from home culture that has then kind of, I would say, been the catalyst for a bunch of changes in the way people kind of see their lives. So, for example, you might have loved your job and gone to work every day because you love the people you were around. And I'd like to think, even here at DUCKLIFE, a lot of what motivates us is being, together, being a bunch of really cool people, culturally kind of aligned, values aligned people, and having a great time together, right? And I think a lot of people enjoy their jobs mainly because of the people they spend their days with. I mean, we spent most of our waking hours at work, right? Yeah. And so in 24 hours, most of our time is at work. So when you spend it with people that you love and you have a good time with, you love your job. Yep. Now, in a COVID world, you're home most of the time isolated in a room physically by yourself, plugged into a computer and basically only working. Yeah. Right? So that social engagement is not there. And then you actually get exposed to your actual job, technically what you're supposed to be doing, and then you're reflecting on whether or not you enjoy it. Yeah. Do you actually like what you do? And you're finally being confronted with that question. Yeah. And to be frank, this year is the year we decided to make ends with the whole agency work ourselves and try to create new opportunities for ourselves where we get to be the masters of our own kind of fate. And so even us as an organization, because we all lived in our own little bubbles and spaces at home, we even came to the realization that being an agency maybe isn't what makes us happy. At least not alone. Maybe there's more more than what we kind of have in our ambitions. And so I'm wondering, with work from home being something that's here from stay, with remote work being something that's only going to get bigger and bigger, and it's only going to be facilitated more and more, these questions are going to be there. Lots of people are going to be confronted with the question of, do they like what they do? Yeah. And the data is showing that most people, the answer is no. And so I think that's one big thing that people are realizing. And I think companies as a whole, DUCKLIFE included, organizations out there, when they think about their culture and their values and the kind of environment that they want to create, they have to realize that it's a lot more complicated and a lot more kind of cumbersome to do than back in the day. So if your culture wasn't super defined in the past, then you're really in a bad spot. If your culture was really well defined and you had a set of values that you lived by, but now everyone's at home, you have to think about how you can bring that home. And then what does remote or work from home work mean for you as a company, and how can you make sure you preserve that? Yeah. And so I think that's a huge thing that's going to happen this year. I also think when I look at Canada, for example, something happened which was lifestyles changed. People, even us, our spending has gone down tremendously because one of our biggest kind of activities, travel, is almost zero. Only going to our home country to see our family. But back in the day, we travel like crazy. Travel budgets are at zero, or spending is at zero, and socializing is at zero. Right? So F&B spend, etc. Anything disposable cash-wise is like
still at zero now.
Still at zero, right? We don't do much, right?
We're not doing much over the summer. Was Canada not open?
But even in Canada, we weren't doing much, right? Socializing as a whole is not something that's back at full speed. So people have all this disposable cash that they're not necessarily spending like they used to. And on top of that, in markets like in the West, I don't know if you had this in the UK, but the Canadian government had stimulus programs, pay people to stay home. Yeah. So if you were in F&B and were earning less than 80% or 70% of what you were earning before, you had stimulus checks. So not only is your spending gone down, but your income's gone up. And so a lot of people just started saving and saving and saving and seeing this pile up. And at a certain point, asking themselves, okay, well, I have all this money. The future is not guaranteed. We just wasted 2 years of our life on standby waiting for COVID to pass. And now I have all this saving. Why the fuck am I working? Let me just go live my life. Let me go travel. Let me jump into an RV. Let me just reduce my spending 90% and just live a little, figure out what it is I want to do while this thing blows over.
Yeah.
So if I have this extra cash, I'm not going to save it for a rainy day, because apparently rainy days are now. And let me just start living. And so, I expect resignations to go up and up and up towards the end of this year, towards the beginning of next year. I do expect some sort of wave back into the workforce, but I think we're a long way away. And I think for organizations today, figuring out how to retain staff is a lot more complicated than it used to be. And your values and culture right now mean everything in terms of being able to retain people. Even for us as an organization, I'm fearful, because I know all of us are now working remotely and working from different places and working from home all the time.
Yeah.
And so even when we downsized our office, we changed permanently a lot of what we do based on this new life. And I think it's going to have a huge impact on us as a business.
Yeah. I think on the culture, there's so much to break down on what you just said. On the culture
front, I went on a rant for like 10 minutes.
That's what I told you about your 20-minute monologues.
20-minute rants. Yeah.
You can watch this on 2x speed, guys. On the culture front, I think that's a really good point. Culture-wise in the workplace, if you had a culture there previously, then how do you transition that? Is
Very
one
difficult.
thing.
Yeah.
Really difficult to do. But also, it's a different type of culture now. So, what do you value? Like, culture gets thrown around in many workplaces over the last kind of decade. It's been thrown around as this thing, what is your culture within the workplace? But people value that. They have a value that they attribute to culture, but then they also have a value that's attributed to kind of their value itself. So what is the value that they're bringing? So to add on top of the stuff that you're talking about when it comes to culture, if you even think about, we talk about wage growth. So wage growth has not kept in line with any form of inflation or any kind of like cost. So people have taken that time and stepped back and said, okay, well, the culture doesn't quite fit me as a person. The value in kind of, currency that I get back doesn't fit with kind of what I deemed as value to myself. And therefore, this doesn't make sense to me anymore. So, businesses or employers are going to have got to tackle this on two fronts. It's how do you satisfy kind of this value that's attributed to me? And then how do you satisfy this kind of difference in what people perceive culture to be? So you have your set of cultural values, but then is it work from home? What do you do to socialize? Is there stuff in the office? What are the expectations? Being, online at what times? Do you allow flexibility outside of geographies? How will this kind of piece together? I think you're right. It's going to be really difficult to kind of pinpoint.
I think one other thing that I kind of wanted to kind of point to in terms of culture and values is the work from home and remote culture has brought in much more complexity to brands and companies, because the distinguishable or lack of distinguishable barriers between personal and professional is eroded overnight.
Yeah, completely.
And so you're seeing burnouts more than ever, not because people are working longer hours, but because their anxiety levels are way higher than they used to be, because they're now mixing personal and professional and living in a super isolated world that is hyper connected, that is super unnatural. So social interaction is the lowest it's ever been.
Yeah.
Digital interactions and the ability to distinguish between personal and professional has eroded completely.
Yeah.
And that anxiety of the world that we live in, the COVID world, the lack of social engagements, and the inability to disconnect professionally has led to high anxiety, high stress, and hence way more burnouts than we've seen. Even within our organization, I would say people feel tired, people feel burnt out, not because we're working like crazy, but because the lifestyle that we now live has driven us to have way more anxiety and stress than we used to.
So I think you're onto something on there. So on the burnout front, the expectations pre-COVID or pre-pandemic were way higher anyway.
Yeah.
Right. So pre-pandemic, we, as a workforce, people were overworked. There was too much office time. The levels of productivity, the expectations were just continuously rising and rising.
It was a very performance-driven culture.
Exactly. So burnout was inevitable. It was already there. There just wasn't the
100%.
kind of the trigger that would then lead you to kind of like allow that to manifest as to what decisions you would actually take. And then when it comes to kind of the actions that people take off the back of that, as an employee of a company, you then have that decision to make. Do I, now that I've had the pandemic, now that I've changed my lifestyle, am I interested in going back to that 9 to 5, or let's face it, 9 to 9 like type cycle, or do I change? Do I just throw the towel in on that? And a lot of people are throwing the towel in.
Yeah, exactly.
But also because technology as it is kind of creating tons of opportunity in the workplace is creating a ton of opportunity for individuals as well, because brands are no longer just fighting with different brands for competition. As a brand, you're competing against every single individual who can now go and create for themselves. We spoke about this earlier, whether it's Substack for writers, copywriters being able to express themselves and earn a living through that, whether it's kind of this new boom of NFTs for artists and creators, which is eventually going to kind of go mainstream over the next 5-10 years. Brands are going to have to compete with individuals at an individual level. It's no longer just competing with, Apple versus Samsung. It's going to be every single person is their own brand, which it kind of already was, but it never really manifested that way. So if your theory is right with the great resignation, if less people come back, if we don't get those levels back up, then it will be because more and more people are going individual in their journeys.
Which kind of means that if you try to look forward 5 to 10 years, there is a theory that you could see a world where brands don't necessarily have huge kind of employee bases, and instead have a huge outsourced capability.
Yeah.
And the outsourced capability is one that is
flexible,
kind of this vagabond, flexible, work from anywhere, work whenever you want, work when you need to culture.
And it makes total sense, right? But what's your highest cost as a business?
Absolutely, people.
Yeah. And what do you have to offer people? You have to give it, what do they value? What, an environment? Yep, sure, that's one thing. Salary? Yeah, that's another thing. Then there's health care, there's pensions. Pensions, that was a failed experiment for our generation, right?
But that's really interesting, by the way. If you go back, that means employer brands, like the attractiveness of working for companies is potentially never going to be a thing, and it'll be the attractiveness of the challenge and the attached compensation to it.
Yeah.
And so you'll value real market value of skill and talent rather than what your organization deems the value of a certain role or specialization, which is amazing.
Yeah.
Which means finally people will get paid what they're worth, and hopefully that's on the upside, but it could be on the downside because talent is now a pool of access to anybody globally,
anywhere, anytime.
And in that future state, your people is no longer your biggest asset.
No. Which is a good thing.
Yeah, which means your biggest asset would be your ideas, your solutions, your this, your that, which you'll try to pool from public, which is incredible.
It's an incredible thing when you think about how things could evolve from there.
That's
different ideas, things wouldn't stagnate so much. Think about how much time you would save on, undoing silos, politics in the office.
Yeah, and then how intellectual property will become the next.
Yeah. Oh, we know where that's going, don't we? Yeah.
That's the podcast. We have an idea. No, but yeah, absolutely. And I think I just wonder. I mean, if we go back to it, I just wonder how much of that is gonna really impact us over here, right? Yeah. You think about a city like Dubai, where 90% of the people that are here to work.
Yep.
Right? Are here based on creating their opportunities, right? And so how many people here can afford to resign? I think the dynamic is a little bit different here because you're only here legally allowed to be here if you are employed.
It's tied to your visa, right?
Right. So I don't think that level of risk appetite is as high, I think, than in Western societies. But I mean, I'm seeing it, I'm hearing it, it's happening all around us, right? So people are resigning.
But a
People
place
are
like
changing.
here would evolve. Based on how the economy's set up here, a place like here would evolve to accommodate for that, to allow that hybrid and that innovation to come in. And it would probably be able to evolve faster than what Western societies would perhaps be used to.
Hopefully. Yeah, that's the idea.
Potentially. Yeah. I think it's really interesting how people's kind of time and, you know, value will shift, and how they will then use that time to kind of, you know, create for themselves. When it comes to the you said the downside risk, you know, people earning less or, you know, taking less home, that's in theory right. If the economy would allow,
If the market doesn't value
Yeah.
a certain thing,
Of
then
course.
let it devalue.
let it devalue, but also allow the market, you know, if the economy was set up in a way that would allow it to deflate. Because at the moment we live in a world where everything just keeps on going up. We can't, we're not sustained in that way. So if the economics of how people work and how people earn changes, then that dynamic would have to shift as well. Otherwise, you would create that, it would be a disaster for 50% of the population, which I guess many would argue it kind of is already today.
I think it's really interesting. I think to wrap up, I think the topic, is the Great Resignation a good thing? I would argue yes, because it puts people first. Right? It's basically allowing humankind to value the right things first.
Does it show data, by the way, on the Great Resignation? It's millennials and Gen Zs,
It's
right?
millennials and Gen Zs. 30 to 40% of that population is considering or has resigned,
Yeah.
and for the sole purpose of trying to have a better lifestyle.
Yeah.
And so it's a great thing that's happening, great movement that's happening. And I would also argue that if people are resigning from their jobs because they're not feeling the value or not feeling worthy or not feeling the purpose in what they're doing, then good. It's also good for the company, because then if that person isn't in their right state of mind, I don't believe the productivity is going to be there.
Yeah.
And then it pushes the organizations to kind of put values and culture at the forefront in order to retain people. So shitty companies will continue to lose people like crazy. Good companies will retain talent. Great companies will attract talent.
Yeah.
And the best companies will adapt to a kind of outsourced, kind of market-driven kind of talent pool, rather than build a headcount internally and a fixed cost that is not sustainable in the long run.
Yeah.
So the Great Resignation is amazing. I think
It's amazing for people.
the fact that it comes
And
from the great,
what are you going to say?
in the early 1900s, the great, can't remember this.
We can use Google in this whole thing.
What was it called, man? Jesus. Let me see. Can't find it. Anyway, but there was something that happened.
It's
I don't know, it's something like the
it's-
Industrial Revolution, but basically
Alright,
something. I think this could be a catalyst for productivity, for growth, for a renaissance to how organizations are built and how productivity is kind of measured, and how happiness drives the new future state of the world, right?
I mean, it's the same with anything, right? People that are going to succeed are the ones that can adapt fastest. So if we look at kind of, when we talk about freelance working, if we talk about freelance working or individuals kind of working for themselves, anyone who's in a freelance gig is already kind of set up. They were already prepared better during the pandemic piece anyway, working from home. Brands that can adjust to fit that new kind of, how people view and value stuff. So their culture shift and how they operate are obviously going to succeed as well. There's going to be a lot of losers along the way, which is exactly right. Zombie companies, bad companies, all of these should in theory go under.
It's going to accelerate the inevitable, which is fantastic.
Which should be a rebuild. I don't want to say the Great Reset, because that's going on anyway.
But it's happening anyway.
Yeah.
But what I love about it is that it's actually going to serve our generations, and it's actually there to kind of benefit our generation, which is really amazing. And I can't wait to see what happens in our region, how it impacts our region. But I hope everyone is aware of the topic, and the idea is to raise awareness on this topic, and hopefully everyone's going to kind of adjust and prepare.
Yeah.
Cool.
Very good.
Episode 1.
No resignations.
No resignations. I can't resign.
This is true.
Yeah. Because it's too expensive to resign from DMCC. Anyways, thanks for listening.
Top and tail with that.
Talk to you later.